Welcome to another episode of What's on Your Mind. I'm your host, Nimade Belu, and I'm so excited to have my guest with me today, Sharifa Rose. It's Women's History Month, so I have such awesome guests joining me. She is a licensed therapist and self love coach. She's passionate about individuals becoming their highest authentic self through self love, self control, and self discovery. Thank you so much for joining me. Would you like to tell everybody just a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Namdi. So I've been doing this for some time, and it kind of happened because I've been through some things. I mean, I think we've all had some form of trauma, even if you haven't recognized that it's trauma. And what's surprising about me is I did my senior research project in high school on schizophrenia, and I that was not what I wanted to do in my life. But now, throughout my career, I have worked at psych hospitals for 6 years, in residential and outpatient. And now I have my own practice and I oversee another practice. So it's exciting. I really love what I do. I have done it for free at the bar around about. So it's pretty cool.
Now, you do both trauma and self love. Was there something about working in the field of trauma that made you really see like self love as an area that that you needed to focus on?
Very much so. So what happens is a lot of people lose themselves, like their identity, and just focusing on them. They're focused so much on what happened to them, and I think that's part of the process. But really, you have to think about you. And still, people are people pleasing in survival mode. So I just said, self love is part of the process. Self love is the highest form of mental health. So I was like, okay, I'm going to focus on that. That doesn't mean I don't focus on other theories. You guys all know them, CBT and solution based. There's a lot of them. But I really try to focus on the individual and getting to know them and building a relationship with them because a lot of people are fearful and scared of letting people in.
Yeah, and that's great. And that leads to my next question, which are like, so what are some common misconceptions around trauma and self love that you see in your practice?
Um, the good ones. I mean, not good ones, but the ones we always hear. It's selfish. It
Mm.
costs a lot of money. Um, that trauma, like everyone necessarily has to understand it. That you can't. What's the way to put this? That sometimes traumatic incidents happen to people, and what happens is you might not understand that for 10 or 20 or even realize it's traumatic to you, but that doesn't invalidate it. And I find that people believe that because that person didn't see it as traumatic, then you're saying, oh, maybe it's not. You're questioning yourself. You don't have to question yourself. If you believe that this caused an extreme stress response, or long term one, then it's traumatic. And I can't tell you if it's traumatic, and no one else can tell you either.
I think that that is a huge thing that people encounter all the time. And I mean, I get it on some point, like when people tell you things, it's natural to like check it against yourself, like how you would think or feel about it. But I know it is hard when it feels like something that was traumatic to you, someone saying it shouldn't be a big deal and like you should just let it go. And for me, it really took a while to realize that like my feelings are my feelings and it's okay to feel that way. But
That's
like
right.
how can someone try to kind of work through that in a sense where they feel okay with that being their feelings?
Well, that's when the foundation of what we're talking about, self love, really comes in because you have to own your own opinion and own your own identity. And I kind of on my bio, it's self loss to self love because you haven't owned yourself. You're people pleasing. You're in survival mode. You're avoiding your feelings. So it's really starting with the foundation of let me get to know me a little bit more, which is hard because we are really used to being with people and people validating us and that being more important than how we see our own selves.
Yep. And I mean, society plays such a huge role in that. And I think that we definitely live in a society that, especially as women, is telling us that we're not enough. So, like, how do societal standards and expectations kind of contribute to the feelings of inadequacy that we have? And, like, how do we navigate around those?
I don't think it's taught enough in schools, as parents. I'm a new parent. I have a 2-year old. I just don't think it's taught enough to have your own identity. I think it's taught for women, like we're saying, for women, go out and help people, go out and serve, and don't take care of yourself. So society is often saying like, be a wife, be a mother, take care of your mother, take care of your uncle. We are the caregivers of the world. I mean, that's what it all comes down to. It doesn't matter if you have children or not, because some people don't want them or won't have them. We are the caregivers of the world, and we just can't pour into, we have to pour into our cup, but your cup can't be empty, and you fill up your own cup. I think that people contribute to helping, pour into your cup, but you are the one who fills up your cup, and it goes into overflow because of you. I don't think anyone can achieve that for you, and I think that's the difficulty. We're at a half a cup, and it's like, I'm still not really where I need to be. And we're just okay with that. You just normalize that. And I'm not okay with it for the people that I work with, or anyone else, because there's more that you can give. You need to learn how to delegate. You need to learn how to, sit quiet with yourself. And it's just a skill set that hasn't been practiced. No one really talks. I think we talk about it more, of course. But really, we're not talking about it as much as we should. And that's why I say things like it should be taught in school more about self-esteem, more about critical thinking, more about, who you are and what your values are. And that's helpful because parents aren't with their children enough. That's the reason why I'm saying that part.
Yeah. I think that one of the things, first of all, you mentioned critical thinking, and I'm always on that soapbox about like how different the world would be if we had more critical thinking skills. And we're never really taught it. Like when you think about like with school, we spend so much time being poured into, which is great, but not being taught that we can have our own thoughts and opinions, and that's okay. And also how to take other people's thoughts and opinions without taking it on us or feeling personally offended or whatever. Like I got a little bit of it because I was a nerd and did debate. So I, had some of that training, but your average person doesn't while they're in school learn how to have those conversations. And I think it makes it harder as you get older, because I have found a lot of people almost see, rather than seeing things as different, it's very much like right or wrong. So then when someone disagrees with them or thinks differently, they feel like that person's telling me I'm wrong.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You made me think of the reason why I believe people don't like other individuals. And it's like, I'm not like you and you're different. And so because you're different, then I think you're wrong in the world. I particularly always think about it when it comes to our LGBTQ plus population. And other individuals also, Black and brown people, that comes up also. But it's hard because we can all be different and still get along and enrich each other. Yeah,
it's one that I'm always trying to preach. Like, it's okay to see things as differently, because I do think we all just sort of want that validation. And when we don't get it in others, we think that it's a reflection of ourselves when it isn't. Something that we all do, when we talk about the area of trauma, is that we all sort of go through it. It's different for everybody. It looks different for everybody. But at some point, everyone goes through some form of trauma. What are some approaches that people can have to building that resiliency that is needed to get over some of those moments?
Well, I think you have to be honest with yourself. I always preach honesty. A lot of times we're just sitting here telling ourselves like it didn't happen, or I'm not sure, or anything else. So it really starts with you creating an intimate relationship with you and starting to be honest, like, this is really bothering me. I like to always use the back burner approach. It's still boiling on the back burner of that stove. And eventually, we set our house on fire. I've seen that in practice before. So starting out with being honest, starting out with just being open to who you are, where you are, starting out with taking that time out to challenge, kind of what we're saying, critical thinking, to question, to be curious, like, what is this feeling? And learning that your feelings are okay and they're valid. And you don't necessarily have to have all the answers. There are sometimes I like come sit at my desk and I'm like, I'm feeling something and I don't even know why I'm feeling it. And that's okay. But as I move in the process, it either goes away or moves in some way, or as I get curious, one of the things that happens is like, oh, it's about this, you
Mm.
know. So we just don't have to have all the answers. And I think we always want to have all the answers. You know, we want to know what's going on. We want to put a right or wrong to it. We want to put a label to it. And you don't have to have the labels to just be in your feelings and be to yourself. It doesn't have to be a cookie cutter at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so hard not to, right? Because you want to have those answers. And that kind of leads me to my next question, because some of us are a little bit of perfectionists, right? Learning to give myself grace has been very hard in certain areas. But because here's the thing, right? You still want to have goals. You still understand, like, I understand, like, discipline is important. And even when people talk about self-love, you know, we think bubble baths and all the things, but like having discipline and self-control and doing some of those things, that is a form of self-love.
That's
But
right.
then how do you not have like harmful perfectionist tendencies? Like, how can you differentiate between the two? And like, what are some ways to like, or things to keep an eye on if you're leaning too far one way or the other?
So you know what? And you're reminding me of someone I completely enjoy. Follow her on all platforms, Mylika.
I
She
love
always
her.
says your message can be messy, and I think we can own that. You know,
Mm.
just do it. Sometimes it's not going to be perfect, but just be willing to put yourself out there in whatever it is. You know, because you can take your time to try to write. Let's use write a book, and it could take you 12 years, but you can put it out in 2 years and then do some additions to that book. So you have to be willing to. I think perfectionism really goes back to anxiety,
Mm.
through some form of trauma response. You know, you just want to make sure people are going to be excited about it. It's going to look a certain way. But then most of the time, those people don't end up getting it done. It doesn't happen. And you're going to hit your mark regardless. They're either going to love it, they're going to like it, or they're going to hate it. So just go for it. You know, it's really about having that courage to say, I'm just going to do anything. I'm just going to make that step. So with people who are perfectionists, they also, as a child, more than likely had someone saying, "This isn't enough. This isn't enough." You felt like you had to do it a certain way, um, and also they probably had difficulty with individuals like, and there's like it was a survival thing. Like if I didn't do it this way, you know, they weren't going to be happy with me in your mind. Sometimes that's actually something that a threat for anxiety statement, you know, a threat that you really are thinking within yourself, but someone didn't also say to you, you know, it's okay however it is.
Mm.
And so I do put some of that on the caregiver also, because they don't open the door to say, oh, it's all right, however you do it, I'm okay, and I'm going to love you. And we create a narrative in our head that, you know, I had to do it this certain way, especially when it comes to like grades. You know, if you gave 100% and you got a C, I'm still clapping for you. You know
Right.
what I mean? Because I know who I was. And that's not where we are as a society. It's like, oh, you had to be an A student, but you got to know your child. You know, that wasn't realistic for them. And then they're out like hurting themselves because they're scared. I'm coming home with a C. What's my parent going to say? So
I came home with tears first before I brought home the seat. One time I cried. And I was like, Mom. But it's only because my mother was very much the same way. Like she expected good grades, but it wasn't so much that like it had to be perfect. It was that she needed to know that we were putting our effort and our all into it.
mhm.
So if we got less than the best because we were slacking, it was unacceptable. But if it was like we tried, like Lord, I tried in chemistry. I could get A's in everything, but chemistry, I just ooh. But like
That's
she knew that it was my battle. So even though I came with the tears in that C, she knew I fought for that C. So it was like, okay, all right. And I think that that is definitely important to sort of give that feedback, like knowing that giving your all, even if it's not
mhm.
at that perfectionist level, is still giving your all.
Exactly. If I was only able to give 40%, that's 100. You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
Yep. What I mean, some people though do still feel overwhelmed by societal expectations and struggles. Like, what advice would you give to someone who's still has that, like, in to help advise them to prioritize their own well-being and their
hmm
own self-love, despite what society may say?
Yeah, you have to learn how to disconnect. We're taking too much in,
Mhm.
and that could be TV. Even you have to learn how to disconnect, because even on TV or social media or anything, we're constantly trying to compare ourselves. So if you're going to always try to compare yourself, you have to learn what is actually going to pour into me. And it's usually something related to where your passions are, what excites you. And then you're going to feel a sense of fulfillment, purpose doing that. So it's really about disconnecting to the things, although they're all around us, we're unwilling. I mean, how often do we really set our phone down for 12 minutes unless we're asleep? You know, can you put your phone away for an hour? That's hard for a lot of people. And what type of physical reactions do you have if you do that?
I feel relief. That's when I knew I needed to take more of a break. My phone died, and I felt like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. Because even if I put it down, I'm like, there's emails to answer, there's things to do. And like when it dies and I don't have any control over if I can do those things, like I feel so good. So I knew like I needed to put in more off phone time.
I love it. You see, and you have to be willing to test it out. And it's also, again, a muscle that we're exercising. You know, you're not initially going to like it, guys, you know, because it's a transition. It's different. Your phone has been a habit. But eventually you'll see, like, you know, I really like taking a walk and not bringing my phone with me. I get to see the trees. I hear the birds. You know, you have to be willing to do something different. The cliche, to get something different. But you'll find that when you disconnect from, and sometimes that disconnection is people too. Let me just say that there are people who are pouring into you, and it's not helpful to your nervous system, particularly when it comes to trauma, to your spirit, you know, to your mind, you know, to your body. Some for them. So it's really in disconnecting and finding what you need to disconnect from. That could also be things like mind mood altering substances such as like alcohol or any other ones. That could mean like food. It's all types of things we're taking in. So I don't just want to make that about social media, but we have to be willing to connect, which is the self, to ourselves. You know, what is helpful for me? What do I need? So that's always the advice I would give someone. And sometimes that's connecting to a person, but finding time to connect with you, just sitting quiet. I'm about to start reading, what is it? 4 minute meditation, 4 minutes something. And I'm excited about it. I do meditation for 4 minutes, sometimes 10, it just depends. But it was a book that, it might've been Mylika.
Recommended. Yeah. I mean, I think that's so good. And like you mentioned, disconnecting from people sometimes is important as well as things. Kendra said, yes, my best friend is currently doing a 4-month social media fast. It's her second time. I love taking social media fast. Like because I need it for work, especially now that I'm on the entrepreneur journey, I can't, but like the first week is hard. The first week is like, I'm fiending for it. But then after that, I feel so good. It actually, like, I have to force myself back into it because you do very much get this, like, when you're in it, it feels like that is your world, right? Like, everyone's talking about this one thing, and this thing that's happening is so major. And then you look up from your phone and you realize that, like, nobody else is really thinking about or caring about that thing. And it's not as all encompassing as it feels when you're deep in social media. So, like, I love social media breaks. Peace and quiet. Yep.
You reminded me of something I heard a psychiatrist say some years ago. When I was 20, I thought everyone was talking about me. When I was 40, I didn't care if anyone talked about me. And when I was 60, I realized no one was talking about me. And that's how we think. Like, we literally think, even at 40, everyone's talking about, everyone wants to know what's going on. And they don't, a lot of people are in their own lane figuring out their own stuff. Okay. And you got to go in your lane and figure out your own stuff. And not care what is happening over in this lane, because you're going to crash trying to be in that lane also.
And that's something I realize, especially because I have like social anxiety sometimes. And what I remind myself is most people are worried about themselves. Even if they think about you for a minute, like I think about like how much time when I'm out am I really thinking about everyone else? And I'm not. I'm worried about myself, even though I'm worrying about myself, worrying about them, worrying about me. But I'm still focused on me, and so are they. Like they're not giving me as much thought as I think I am. So I just need to worry about what it is that I need to do. And something I definitely identify that I need to do is boundaries. So my word for 2024 is boundaries. And I think that that's huge and important in the realm of healing from trauma and, you know, giving yourself some of that self-love. So what are some good ways to practice and maintain healthy boundaries?
Well, again, that honesty, you got to know what they are. You have to realize this is a problem. You have to realize they're taking my money. You have to realize I'm not equipped to be in that situation anymore. And I would suggest like really writing it down, taking the time out to really reflect. And then it's like you cannot implement all of these boundaries at one time because you'll lose your mind. But implement one or two. And when you implement one or two, you have to define what is going to happen if I don't do it. A lot of times it's a boundary with a person, but you also have boundaries with yourself. You know what I mean? Like if you are not respecting your own boundary of I don't answer my phone till 10 o'clock, and then you keep answering, then you're mad at the person because they keep calling. You had the boundary.
Right.
You know, they're going to know you're serious when you really decide you're not going to answer your phone after 10 o'clock, you know? And what is the consequence of that? I am not into cancel culture, but you do have to be willing to have conversations and understanding that our relationships, you know, I'm married and I have friends and all of these other things. And sometimes you gotta have like 20 conversations with a person. You have to decide if you value that relationship enough. That is completely up to you. But I do value a lot of my relationship enough to know, like, are you really working on it? Or are you just doing whatever you want to do? So evaluating, how's this boundary going? Assessing it, having conversations, because conflict creates a change, guys. So we have to have disruption to really get to a point where you're evolving and you're growing. But again, if you don't know, if you're not honest with yourself about like, this is a problem. And the one way you know you need a boundary with a person is when they get irritated and agitated. That's how you know. That's like the key kick. If you say, no, I'm really not going to be able to make it to your dinner, and they start screaming and yelling and they're not talking to you for 20, I need to tell this person no a little bit more because they haven't respected that I need to do what I need to do for myself.
I literally lost a friend because I didn't go to the event, and I'm just like it was rough for me, but I'm also like, if that's like, you know, I've been struggling, and it is what it is, but it's unfortunate, especially for people. I call myself a recovering people pleaser. I'm always on my recovering journey. Sometimes it still kicks in, but what's really helped for me with boundaries, and that is the understanding that boundaries isn't about keeping other people out, it's about advocating for yourself. So versus where you see myself putting up boundaries as like, oh, I'm stopping this person, I'm keeping this person from this thing, like I feel bad because my things are harming that, instead of think of, no, I'm just trying to do what's best for me and what I need. And it actually also helps me when other people put up their boundaries. Versus before, I'd be like, oh, they're being so selfish, because that's what we're taught, right? Especially as women, we're taught to like do for others, and I'd be like, they're so selfish. But now that I have my own boundaries, I'm totally okay when other people do their boundaries.
Yeah, I love it. It really allows you to stay in relationship with the person. I need to take care of myself. You need to take care of yourself. I have to respect what you need. You have to respect what I need. And sometimes that does mean having a conversation, and sometimes that just means, you know, we no longer can be in relationship with each other because everyone's not necessarily going to understand. I would say this about boundaries. Depending on what's happening, you don't want to bring up old information. So let's just say you're going to, somebody wants you to go somewhere, and it's, you know, I'm only going to be able to make the dinner because there are some things I want to do to take care of my business. Don't bring up, because last time we had a fight and, you know, I was tired and all these other things. You just want to stay with, I'm focused on me and what I need to do for me. You don't have to give an explanation on what you're going to do when you're not going to the rest of the events. So you really just want to make it as simple and concise. And then for some people, you know, if you know they understand your boundaries, you can tell them more. But I wouldn't bring up old information because it opens up the door to other disagreement. And then it doesn't allow for sometimes the person to hear you, I find. And I think, you know, you just can say what you have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a couple comments from Izzy. Exactly. Sometimes we are stretching ourselves way out and there's no reciprocation. Facts.
Yeah. No,
And then also same here. now I've learned to set major boundaries. It's a form of self-love. It really
That's right.
is.
It really
And I
is.
gotta tell you, the more I say no, the more I love saying no. I mean, I used to be scared, and now I'm like, I still am like a little bit, but it feels good. And also thinking of like the positives. A, saying no sometimes leaves you open for something more positive, and then B, I'm not saying no to something that's going to stress me out or tax me.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if the person is understanding, it's actually better for our relationship for me to give a clear no than to me to give a maybe or we'll see and then
Exactly.
drop the ball in the end because it was
Mm-hmm.
too much for me or because I couldn't handle it. And I found that no actually is sometimes better for the relationship if you give it up front than to have that person wondering where things are.
Yeah. And I would like to say that the boundary is important because, well, not the boundaries work. The boundary is always important, but the difficulty is a lot of people don't know what's working for them and what's not. So the
Mhm.
self-awareness is just non-existent
Yeah.
individuals. Like we're just like doing everything and then we wonder why we burnt out. So it's really about assessing like what's really working for me, what makes me toot and tot and love and jump and scream, and we just don't know it.
Mhm.
So I would suggest like taking some time out to think like what's really working in my favor, which is kind of okay, what's like really draining me, and then developing boundaries from that.
I think that that's a great point because I think a lot of people aren't. I am painfully self-aware, as I know, and as every therapist has told me. But so because of it, like I don't realize, or it took me a while to realize how many people truly are not that self-aware. But if someone has like recognized that about themselves or know they need to, like, what are some good ways, like, or good questions to practice?
Mhm.
Like, how can someone work on being more self-aware if they're not?
Okay, if they're not, you got to slow down. We're not mindful. We're not present at all. So, I mean, I think they kind of go hand in hand. If you're not present and mindful, you don't know what's happening in your life. How can you really know what's going on in your life? So it's going to take slowing down and realizing, okay, is this helpful? What is going on? How am I feeling in my body? Our body is always aligned with our mental health, guys. Like when you have a cold, you're not as attentive, attuned, emotionally available. It's just, that. So imagine if any other thing is happening. When you're stressed, then there's some physical reaction. You might not know what that is because, again, you're supposed to move in and shaking and going, but there's always a physical reaction to everything that happens to us. It might be less for others. So you want to assess that. You want to look at like what's happening with me physically and mentally. And then at that point, you're looking at it, you're assessing it, and then you're realizing questions like, okay, what can I do differently? How is this helping me? One of the questions I always tell people to ask themselves when it comes to like trauma responses is this helpful to me as a person or am I living out my trauma response?
Mm.
Before you answer the question, before you answer any question and you give a yes or a no, because sometimes we say yes and it's like, I just want to be a people pleaser. And it's like, no, I'm just doing that because of that. So you really have to be willing to slow down to create that awareness for yourself to see, like, okay, am I okay? How is this really helpful? And then, from there, you can keep questioning.
Yeah, I mean, and when we go back to talking a little bit about trauma, like how do you, because nobody is one thing, right? We're all made up of a bunch of different things. So like, how do you address like the intersectionality between like trauma and our identity, especially as like women? And then when you play like race, sexuality, social economics into it, like how do you address trauma in a way that addresses those multiple areas?
So I would say, it's people do come to me for multiple reasons and they don't know. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily start out with trauma. It could start out with you thinking about your identity. So we're always working through that big picture. So I'm never like, okay, we're just looking at that trauma. We're looking at that trauma and we're realizing, you're not really looking at yourself through that trauma. So we're working on how are you taking care of yourself in that? What does it look like from all of your other roles as a mom or as a friend or anything else? So you have to continue to look at it as a big picture, and that's how it works out best because it can't just be a tunnel. I can't just say, all right, well, we're only going to look at it from this side, because if we're looking at that side, we're forgetting that you're a whole person that came from being a 5-year-old to a 10-year-old and now you're a 50-year-old. So I have to be willing to look at it from that perspective. And then it just like kind of falls in. I don't know if I truly answered your question, but yeah.
No, it does, because it's just,
Yeah.
like there's just so much of it, and sometimes I feel like we feel like we're boxed in, but
Yeah, no, you cannot just say I'm going to just look at it this way. It just would never work. And it's different when I hear people going to therapists and they think they can just stay in that we never talk about anything else. It's similar to when individuals say they think they can't need to talk about the specifics of their trauma with their therapist. You don't have to get super specific. It's just you allowing you to process it. I don't need to hear the itty gritty details, because that's probably traumatic to me also. But we do need to learn how you're processing and how you're filtering through that and feeling those feelings, and being attuned to your body. So for me, I don't necessarily need to look at it from just one lens. You're still like a mother, and then you're a cousin, and you're all these other things. And that's why like a great assessment and constantly assessing your client is really helpful, because you should be constantly questioning, like, what does that look like for you and how that was going, instead of just saying, all right, we're only looking at it from a wife angle, because you were a 5-year-old little girl and you're raging.
No, that makes a lot of sense. We have a great question. How does the stress of the world events impact trauma? I fast from news in the morning because it's nothing but other people's traumas poured into you first thing in the AM. Same. I can't take in stuff first thing. I've learned.
I don't watch the news anymore. I stopped it probably right before, probably like 8 or 10 years ago. It might be longer. I know what's going on in the world, but it's not something I watch. I just can't. But news is also like social media, so you have to be careful with that. That is still the news, which are you? It's just going back to what are you taking in, and how does that impact you? It impacts us. You hear about Gaza, you could just hear about it, and it can mess with your nervous system. Every time I hear something or see something, I immediately have to shut down my phone, and I have to pray, and I have to like meditate. And I mean, every time I've seen certain things, I'm like, I'm struggling. I get teary eyed. So I know that it's impacting us. And if it's not impacting you, you have learned to numb your feelings, because we are people and we are relational. And that's what everyone forgets. We are meant to be in relationship. We are meant to feel our feelings. I know everyone thinks it's like vulnerability is not a strength, but it really is. You are meant to know that that spirit resonates with me and that person feels safe. That is what, and when you don't feel like that, you've just learned, my feelings are not something that I need to feel. Either you were taught it, or as a result of traumatic experiences, you thought this was the best way to survive. And that's hard, because other people can't really see you for who you are, because you're just kind of like a walled individual. Not kind of, you are a walled individual. So, yeah.
Yeah, it can definitely be hard taking this stuff in. I know, like with the Gaza, because I was born in Liberia and I came over here because of the Civil War. So I can't take in any content of it. Like it's very triggering for me. And I think sometimes people forget that as well, when they're calling for people to speak up about things and talk about things. Like some people have, even sometimes the people who are most quiet are because they feel it the most and can't be on a social platform about certain issues because it's triggering to their own trauma.
Yeah.
Now, something that, I love that especially as Black women, like we are celebrated for our strengths and all the things that we do. But I feel like that strong Black woman trope is almost at a detriment to us, right? Because it's like we're then expected to be able to handle every and anything and take it on and be okay. But we know that that's not the case. So how do you find the balance between being a strong Black woman and being a strong Black woman? Like how do you find the right balance in there?
I think people often want to test it, or we want to test it ourselves, because you can be your worst enemy. Just so you know, you could be your worst enemy. And you have to be attuned enough with you to know Am I pushing something that is really not going to help me? Or do I need to advocate for myself in that moment to delegate this or give that to someone else or just stand firm in my boundaries? Because again, the social media and all the other outlets are saying, you got to go, you got to be a wife and a mother and this and that and that and that. You got to have a career, you got to make $1 million. It's saying all that. And it's like, no, I think I'm good with where I am. Doesn't mean I don't want more, and if I get more, but I'm not gonna go for the 400 dash when I can run a what is that other one?
100 meter?
No, the long run that they try to get me to do it, like running longer.
Like long distance cross country?
Long distance. But what
Yeah.
is that? What was that called though in high school? I forgot. So yeah, you don't have to do the 400-meter dash. You can take your time and be in the journey. And that's what's more important, to be in the journey. But I'm really going back to that self-awareness. We don't know that we're being the strong Black woman. We don't know that instead of you telling me you're struggling, you want to just focus on me. My cousin does that quite often, and I'm like, no, we're talking about you right now. What is happening? And I have to like bring her back because she just wants to be almighty. And I'm like, you don't have to be almighty with me. I want to see your vulnerability. I want to feel that there are things going on and how can I support you and help you. And I don't think, again, it's normalized enough to be in that space. So we just run that 400-meter dash.
Yeah. No, I like that because we do need to kind of slow down and not test ourselves. I think what you said about being your own worst enemy is definitely major. I can't thank you enough for joining me tonight to talk about self-love and dealing with trauma. Before we leave though, if someone really wants to make sure that they're focusing on fostering that self-love and building it out so they don't feel like they're doing too much, asking too much, all of the things. So I think that happens a lot of times, right? Especially because I always say you're the main character of your life. I stand by that rule. But that doesn't mean you always have to be the center of attention, which is where people get it twisted, but you can still be the main character. But I think a lot of people feel uncomfortable in that space because it's like, it's too much about me. And I'm like that word I saw before, selfish. How can someone really sort of, what is the word I'm looking for? Like not celebrate themselves, but like advocate more for themselves and their self-love, be a champion of themselves without feeling like they're doing too much or going too far, like knowing that it is just like that self-love that they need.
You have to be open that people are going to guilt trip you. You just have to be open to that. That's going to happen. If they're used to you giving them an apple every day and then you decide no more apples, there's going to be some difficulties there. And if you're open to that, then you continue on your journey of, I need this for me. Eventually, usually people do really value you and they will fall into line. Okay, I only get an apple once a month. All right, I can handle that. The thing is, we don't like conflict. No. And so what we do is we fall back into, I'm going to keep giving you an apple. Mm-hmm. And so what I would say to anyone is, stay with your pace. Stay with where you are. If you're saying to your own children, because you start to even with them, all right, I need this 10 minutes. Then you take your 10 minutes. They might not like it at first, but you take the 10 minutes. And eventually they're like, oh, that's mom's 10 minutes. I'm going to just go over here. People will get used to it. It's just difficult doing something new, guys. Remember when we had Nokias, and then we like, y'all know how to do that Apple so fast. It was different, but we were open to it, right? You have to be open to something new and different. And doing the hard, because that's the hard part. The maintenance that you guys like to do, like getting your hair done, your nails done, and doing the showers and all that, that's cool. But those boundaries, those hard questions, getting curious about yourself, sitting by yourself, journaling, really learning how to self-soothe, the hard part, that is when it really shifts your life completely.
Yes. I love that. I always love conversations with you. You're a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for joining me. If people want to get a hold of you or learn more about you, how can they find you?
I am on Instagram and Facebook as you are therapist, Fave Therapist. And then you can email me at Sharifa at yourselflovecoach.com.
Perfect. Thank you. And Kendra said, great topic, show, host, and guest. Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much.
Thank
Kendra.
you.
And thank you for joining me. And thank you, everybody at home, for joining us as well. We'll be back next Thursday with another great guest. So thank you and have a great evening.